Thank you for joining us.
Okay, right. Thank you. And yeah, the Tikkun Leil Shavuot at the Kehilah is always one of the highlights of the year for me. So I'm glad that we still have a way of doing it. So thank you for organizing that, and thank you to all the people who are participating in whatever way. So the title of the shir, How Odd of God, is a reference to the poem, which you may have heard. How odd of God to choose the Jews, which was written by W.N. Ewer in 1926. And although some people find it anti-Semitic, I think it's not necessarily to be read that way. It's a good question, because choice of a certain kind, and we'll develop this thought more, is odd. Choices don't always have reasons that we can fully understand. And it's a good question, how to understand the idea that Am Yisrael, that the people of Israel are the chosen people. And I think that there's probably no aspect of Judaism that has generated so much confusion, misunderstanding, and enmity as the idea of the chosen people. And this is strongly associated with the Chag of Shavuot, because it was on the second day of Sivan, before the 3 days, the Shlosh Yimei Hagbolah, that we were sort of designated as chosen. And some people think that that's why we don't say Tachanun on that day, on the second of Sivan. The first is Rosh Chodesh. After the second, we have the 3 days of preparation for Matan Torah, for the giving of the Torah. So what about the second? Well, it happened on the second that we were chosen. So what exactly does it mean? I'm going to try to I'm going to develop an objection to the notion and try to understand it in a way that responds to the objection. So first of all, just something about how important it is. In the Guide of the Perplexed, Maimonides emphasizes the importance of belief in creation of the world from nothing. I won't get into the details, and then he says, why is it so important? Well, it's a foundational principle of Judaism. He says, with that belief in creation from nothing, miracles become possible and the law becomes possible. And all the questions that may be asked on this will vanish. So why is that? Because if you say it's creation from nothing, constrained by nothing, and on the basis of nothing, then it's nothing but an act of divine choice. It's an act of divine will. And if you didn't have that, you would be in a very difficult situation when it came to raising certain questions. Like, why did God give the revelation to this one and not that one? Why did this person become a Navi and that person didn't become a prophet? Why did God give the Torah to this particular nation and not to others, right? Why did God choose the Jews? And so on. And it gives a list of other questions. You wouldn't be able to really answer that question if you didn't believe in an original act of divine will with no basis whatsoever, at least that we can understand. But if you say that there is such a thing as creation from nothing, so the whole metaphysical system begins with that act of divine will, then you can say, well, God wanted it this way. That's why God chose this person to be a Navi and not that person. And this is why God gave the Torah to one people and not to another people. Because that's how the whole thing starts. It starts with that foundational principle of divine will and choice. A choice that is, if you like, odd. The term that Rambam used is particularization, which is the term probably taken from Al-Ghazali, the great Muslim philosopher and theologian. Things that cannot be understood by us because they are choices, they are particularizations without any intelligible basis. So on the face of it, that's a difficult idea for a rationalist to accept. But Rambam says we have to accept it as a foundational principle of Judaism in order to understand that divine choice works that way. Now, the key text that we need to think about is from Shemot Yud Tes, and this is what was said on the 2nd of Sivan. Ko Samar Leves Yaakov v'sagei livnei Israel. Thus shall you speak to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel, Atem ra'isem asher asisem l'Mitzrayim. You've seen what I did to Egypt. V'asa'eschem al kanfei nisharim, and I carried you on eagle's wings, v'avieschem eloi, and I brought you to myself. The ata, and now, im shama tishm'u b'koli, if you listen to my voice, ushmartem as brisi, and you keep my covenant, v'yisem li segula mikol amim, and you'll be my treasure. We'll come back to that word segula. We'll try to understand this. What exactly does it mean? From all the people. You're chosen to be a segula, whatever that is. Ki li kol ha'aretz, another very important phrase, because the whole land, the whole earth is mine. V'atem tiyu li, you're going to be to me, again, an important phrase, mamleches kohanim, a kingdom of priests, v'goy kadosh, and a holy nation. These are the things that you should say to the children of Israel. So these are the terms that we need to understand. We'll come back to them shortly, but we need a bit of preparation. And we need to understand then what a segula is, what a mamleches kohanim is, a kingdom of priests, and a goy kadosh, a holy people. And how is it related, in particular, to the phrase ki li kol ha'aretz, because all the earth is mine. So I want to address a modern challenge to this notion. A lot of different versions of this that you could think about, but I wanted to pick this one for a good reason. And this is from Mordechai Kaplan's book, The Future of the American Jew. Mordechai Kaplan, I think, was a very influential, important figure in American Judaism. He was the founding advisor of what became Young Israel. He himself taught his whole career at the Jewish Theological Seminary, influenced many people in what became the conservative movement. I think at the time when he started studying there and teaching there, wasn't so clear what that was going to be, and there wasn't really a separation between conservative and Orthodox and so on. But he himself also became the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. So he had a massive impact on American Judaism. So here's the comment. Now, you may know that in Reconstructionism, they reject the doctrine of chosenness. That's one of the central moves that they make under Kaplan's influence, one of the central differences between Reconstructionist Judaism and other strands. So he says, Judaism can certainly not afford to harbor any doctrine which is in conflict with the ethical basis of democracy. That basis is the intrinsic worth of the individual human soul, a worth which is independent of the people, race, or church to which one belongs. This implies that no people, race, or church can confer upon its members a higher human status than does any other. Democracy as such calls for the treatment of individuals, despite their marked differences, as equals from the standpoint of law and of their right to happiness and salvation. Ethical democracy goes one step further and calls for the treatment of all peoples, races, and churches as equals in all respects. Indeed, societies are far more like one another in their characteristics and behavior than are individuals. Hence, discrimination between one people and another is even more irrational and unethical than between one individual and another. And I think that's a very interesting passage, and that's, I think, the real heart of his dispute with the doctrine of chosenness. He goes through in this chapter different interpretations, and he thinks that it needs to be rejected. Now, you could say, well, okay, he's talking about the future of the American Jew. He's saying that Judaism should accommodate itself to this American notion of democracy. It's an external challenge, whether you think that's good or bad. But I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that as he develops it, the basis of what he calls the ethical basis of democracy is not really external to Judaism. It's the idea that the individual is created b'tselem Elokim, in the divine image, and therefore every individual human being, Jewish, non-Jewish, whatever they are, has the same intrinsic worth. So I don't think that you can just brush off his challenge as coming from something external to Judaism. So that's, to me, is the most interesting modern challenge that I have seen. Now, here's the bit where I have a lot more to say, which I'm not going to talk about. If someone wants to contact me, I'm happy to go into other details. But this dispute, it seems to me, is exactly analogous to one between two of the great philosophers of the 20th century, who happen to have been two of my teachers. John Rawls, who was the greatest political theorist of the second half of the 20th century, most famous for his book Theory of Justice, and Stanley Cavell, his colleague at Harvard, who was most famous for his contributions to aesthetics, but it's an approach to aesthetics that has implications for all the areas of philosophy. And the dispute that they had, this Rawls is on the left and Cavell on the right, is about whether democracy is compatible with the view sometimes called moral perfectionism. Moral perfectionism says that certain individuals who serve as moral exemplars have a kind of added value. And in particular, the argument has to do with Nietzsche and various passages in which Nietzsche seems to suggest that all of us should live and society maybe should be organized for the sake of the great man. Okay, so Rawls says in Theory of Justice, such a view is incompatible with democracy because everybody's equal. Cavell takes a different line, and basically, to cut a long story short, he says, well, first of all, when Nietzsche says live for the great man, it's not one particular person, it's the live for the great human being that you should aspire to be. So it's not one great man, but the great human being that you're supposed to become yourself. And secondly, not everything is about the political order. There's a kind of moral value to exemplary individuals that is entirely compatible with democratic citizens having the same political value. But maybe some people have a certain extra moral role that they are able to play. So let's look carefully at the central part of Kaplan's comment. He says, democracy as such calls for the treatment of individuals, despite their marked differences, as equals, from the standpoint of law and of their right to happiness and salvation. That's very important. He doesn't say that everybody has to be treated in exactly the same way in every context of life. You know, if one person gets steak, then everybody has to have steak, right? That would be ridiculous. Some people don't like it. Some people don't want to eat it. They're vegetarians and so on. Right? It clearly can't mean that everybody gets exactly the same treatment. It's the standpoint of law and also the right to happiness and salvation. Right? So yes, sure, every individual has that right, but maybe there's something other than those three things, law, happiness, and salvation, that we should be thinking about as well. So he doesn't say that all individuals are the same. He then goes on to say that all collectives are equals in all respects, as if there's no difference at all. It's a little unclear why he thinks this. In the passage he says, well, societies are more alike than unlike, but it doesn't seem to me absurd to think that you could have the same situation with respect to collectives as you do with individuals. Maybe collectives get different treatment if there's a good reason for it. But at the same time, they would have to be equal from the standpoint of law and equal from the standpoint of happiness and salvation and so on. So it wouldn't mean that they are treated differently from a legal point of view. But from a different point of view, maybe they would merit a different kind of treatment or a different kind of consideration, just like individuals. So Cavell's response to Rawls, again, just to cut a long story short, is that some people succeed in living in such a way that they become morally exemplary. Some people are heroes. Maybe everybody can be a hero, But some people have actually managed it, and that's important. That's not to say that from the standpoint of law or the political order, they're somehow, they should get special preferential treatment. It doesn't mean that. Nor does it mean that they alone are worthy of happiness and salvation. Nevertheless, you could say there's something special about this person. There's something special about this great hero of mine, whether it's a sports hero or a political hero or a religious hero. There's something special about them. Why? Because I find my own aspiration mirrored by them. Right? By seeing how they act, I can see how I could also become a great person. And as again, it might be everybody could do that, but we know in this world that not everybody actually has succeeded in attaining that status. It's not that we should all imitate those people and try to be just like them. Again, that seems like a mistake. We should emulate them, right? And try to become exemplary in our own way. And maybe that would be the full realization of our own intrinsic worth. So the question for me then is, can you find an interpretation of what it is to be the chosen people that would be equivalent to that answer that Cavell gives to Rawls, but now it would apply to a collective, not to an individual? And if you accept the answer and can find a parallel, then we've met Kaplan's challenge, and we would show that the chosenness of a people is compatible with the intrinsic worth not only of individuals, but even of collectives. And I think there is such an interpretation of the doctrine of the chosen people in the commentary to the Chumash of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. I like this picture. It's from his first job. He's very young. Rav Hirsch, as you may know, was one of the great leaders of German Jewry. And one of his first groundbreaking works was the 19 letters that he wrote, originally anonymously, in which he's addressing someone who has become, has fallen away from the traditional path of observance. And he announces that he's going to follow it up with 2 books. One book is going to spell out the basic ideas of Judaism, and the other one's going to talk about halacha, and it's going to go through the basic halachas of the Jewish year. In fact, he only wrote the second book. It's called Chorev, and it's about the halachas that you need to know to go through the Jewish year. He never wrote the book where he spells out the fundamental ideas of Judaism. However, I think you can reconstruct what he thinks about those basically from his commentary on Chumash together with some of his other essays. So let's start with what he says about Bereshit Perek Gimel. And this is the point where Adam and Chava are thrown out of Gan Eden. They're thrown out of the Garden of Eden. By Garish Adam, with God threw out the human being. By Yashkem Mikeden the Gan Eden as Hakruvim es Lahad Acherev HaMizapechas, and he placed there the cherubim, some kind of angels, and this flaming sword that turns each way to Lishmoris Derech Eitz Chaim, to guard the way to the tree of life. So here's Hirsch's comment. He says, culture begins the education of humanity, and the Torah completes it. The Torah is human education in its consummate form. Right? So right before this, remember, Adam and Chava realize after sinning that they're naked, and they cover themselves, and then God gives them clothes. He says, the fig leaf and the apron, the first signs of culture, began the education of man. And culture that is subordinated to morality is the first stage of man's return to God. In the case of Israel, Derech Eretz and Torah are tied together. Right? Derech Eretz, for Hirsch, is the ethical norms that one has to obey in order to live well with other people who share the same land, the same Eretz. It's human ethics, and that's tied together with the Torah. In the house of Israel, the perfect human being and the perfect Jew are identical concepts. In the development of humanity, however, culture precedes Torah. The sword and the cherubim, those are the 2 things in the pasuk, which he glosses as suffering, and the intuitive perception of a higher being. Remember that later on in the Mishkan, God's voice comes to Moshe from between the cherubim. So for him, that's revelation. So the sword is suffering, and the cherubim represent revelation. Those 2 things will guide mankind to the path of culture, which leads to the tree of life. It's the Derech Eitz Chaim. Hence, the Jew should cherish all that is good and true in culture, and by their personal appearance and demeanor, as a cultivated human being, demonstrate that to be a Jew means to be a human being raised to a higher plane. It's the full consummation of humanity. Being a Jew is not something other than humanity. It is humanity in a certain consummate, fully actualized form. And that would combine Derech Eretz and Torah. And that's why Hirsch's fundamental idea is that Jews should be observant with it and excel in each sphere of human culture. Not only Torah. Of course, yes, Torah, and learning Torah as well. But they have to be in every realm of human life. They have to be in the arts. They have to be in the sciences. They have to be in the humanities. They have to be in commerce and so on. And that's part of the vision. Now we go to Shemot, and this is the point where Am Yisrael are being instructed about the Korban Pesach, and the pasuk says, "Ki yagir itcha ger," when a stranger dwells with you, v'asa Pesach l'Hashem, and you make the Passover sacrifice for God. Himolo kol zachar v'az yukrav l'Asosa. First, they should circumcise all their male children and then approach to do it. And they'll be just like any other citizen, anybody who's born in the land. It'd be just the same, equal. But an uncircumcised person should not eat thereof. So why is it important to mention that at the point of Yetzias Mitzrayim? It's not going to be relevant. It's clearly talking about a future year. Why is it necessary to say that now? So Hirsch says, at this time, upon the establishment of the Jewish nation, it is declared that the establishment of this nation is not just for the sake of the descendants of those redeemed from Egypt and their posterity. The events that transpired from the days of Abraham till the redemption from Egypt transpired for the benefit of humanity. Any human being can make this path their own and enter the circle of the redeemed. In God's state, what matters is not lineage or connection, but one's inner life, one's humanity. And later on in Bamidbar, I won't go into it, he points out that on Pesach Sheni, somebody who converted after the first Pesach can also bring a korban. You might think that they wouldn't be able to unless there's somebody else who's bringing a korban who already had the obligation beforehand. But in fact, that's not the case. When somebody becomes a ger, they have all of the equality, they have complete equality with any citizen. Because to be Jewish is to be human. Now, when Moshe speaks to Pharaoh, he's told by God to say, you should say to Pharaoh, Israel is my son, my firstborn. What does it mean? Is it some kind of privilege? Hirsch says no. He says, what is the Bechor? What is the firstborn? It's not the person, not the one who is free and unfettered. On the contrary, his duty is to be the first servant. In fact, we know that the Bechor was originally meant to be the Kohen, the priest. And that's the idea here. Moreover, even among animals and plants, we find the Bechor, right? The Bikurim, for example, the first fruits that we offer on Shavuot. The form of the word is active, not passive. The Bechor is not the one who is set free, but the one who sets free. The forces of the womb, which heretofore have been restricted, are released and unfolded by him. He is the Peter Rechem, the opener of the womb. Hence, when God says, B'ni Bechori Yisrael, this means, with Israel, the womb of humanity will be opened. Right? A new epoch opens. With Israel, I like this phrase, the dance will begin. All peoples are obligated to join him as my sons. Right? So this is not to say Am Yisrael are different from everybody else. It's to say Am Yisrael happened to be the first. But they're inviting everybody else to join in as well. I come to you in your own name and in the name of all of humanity. Israel is my first but not my only child. Israel is only the first people that I have won as mine. And then he points out in the next pasuk, it says, let my son go that he may serve me, not my firstborn. Not as B'ni B'chori, but as B'ni do I demand freedom for Israel. As I will demand for any people that will be my devoted son. Israel is not the first in rank, but the first in time. So that's the importance. So every human being and every nation is a child of Hashem. We happen to be the Bechor. We're the first ones. We're the Peter Rechem. We start the dance, but everybody's invited to the dance. Okay, finally we get to the central passage from Shemot Yud Tes. V'ata im Shemot tishmu b'koli u'shmatim esprisi v'yisem li segula mikol ha'amin. What does that mean? So I didn't give all the proofs that he offers, but his idea is this. Segula is a possession to which no one else except its owner is entitled, and which has no relationship to anyone except its owner. It doesn't mean there's something special about that thing in any other sense. Applied to our relationship with God, the term segula sets a fundamental condition that we become God's possession, completely and exclusively God's, with every fiber of our being, with every aspect of our nature, with all our aspirations. Our whole existence and all our aspirations should be dependent upon God alone. God and no other force, no other being should shape our way of life and give direction to our actions. And we'll see in a minute that this is important because it's the breaking of the political order. Every other nation, Hirsch is going to emphasize, has its own political interests. But we have to have something special. We are also a nation, and therefore we are once both in the political order, but we're also in some other order as well, in a special direct relation to God. So why does it say Kehilah kol haaretz right after that? Because the whole earth is mine. The relationship into which you are now to enter with me is not an exceptional relationship. Rather, it's the beginning of the renewal of the normal relationship that should exist between me and all the earth. And remember that derech eretz for Hirsch is the basis of ethics. You have to get along with other people with whom you share a land, with whom you have to coexist. Right? So the entire earth, everybody else who's part of the ethical community, should have the same relationship, really, with God. According to their destiny, all humanity and all nations are mine, and I'm educating them to be mine. Right? So the reason why you're to be a segula is not because there's something special about you. It's because li kol haaretz, because the whole earth is mine, and I'm going to start this process now. But the whole of humanity has to be involved. And then there were two other phrases we needed to understand. Mamleches kohanim, goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So Mamleches kohanim, each and every one of you is to be a kohen by allowing all your actions to be regulated by me, by accepting upon yourself the old malchus shemayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Again, kingdom of heaven is a different order from the political order. And living up to it, through your word and living example, you are to spread knowledge of God and homage to it. So Am Yisrael is meant to be an exemplary collective. Just like there are moral exemplars among individuals, there's an exemplary people that has to start this process. Goy kadosh, just as individually you're to be priest-like, so is the outward impression made by your community to be one of holiness unto God. You are to be a unique nation among the nations, a nation that does not live for its own renown, its own greatness, and its own glory, but for the establishment and glorification of the kingdom of God on earth. The nation is not to seek its greatness and power and might, but in the absolute rule of God's moral law. That's the meaning of Kedusha. Sorry, I'm running over time. I'm almost finished. One other thing is from Devarim, the 7th chapter, because there too the phrase, it's not Goy Kadosh, but Am Kadosh is used. And the important thing here is that it mentions God's love. In the 7th pasuk, Lo merubachem mikol amim. It's not because you are the largest of the peoples. Hashak Hashem bochem, vayivchar bohem, yatah ma'at mikol amim. You are actually very small. It's not because of you are so significant quantitatively. Ki mi'avas Hashem eschem. It's from love and keeping the oath, the promise made to your ancestors. And Hirsch comments on that. You are a national society that is holy. Other nations bear the objective of their destiny within themselves, and the supreme purpose of their national union is the preservation of their national existence. The purpose of your national union lies outside itself. Your national union does not belong to itself, it belongs to God, and it must place itself at God's disposal. You are to exemplify a nation that is unique, a nation that in none of its relations belongs to another power, a nation that develops entirely on the basis of its belonging exclusively to God. So it's not because something different in our intrinsic worth. Every person has the same intrinsic worth. And in a certain way, every collective has the same intrinsic worth. But just as some individuals have a role to play of being exemplary for others, and maybe it's something that everybody could do, so too it happens that we were picked to be the first one to be exemplary as a collective. I'm not going to read out the next passage, although I think it's a very powerful one, and you can look at it if you want to. I think the slide should be available. It's about love. Love is odd. How odd of God to choose the Jews. There's something that involves exclusivity about love, it doesn't mean that anybody is excluded, however. It's an exclusivity without exclusion, right? I love each of my children, but it doesn't mean that by loving one, I'm somehow taking anything away from any of the others. Each of one's relationships with one's children or with one's loved ones is a unique relationship. It's exclusive. It involves the two of you. And nobody else is involved in that in the same way. But that's true of each of those relationships. And God can have that loving relationship with each individual and with each collective. And each one will be exclusive. Nobody is excluded by that sort of exclusivity. So finally, the idea is then that Am Yisrael is chosen to exemplify the human being who strives to develop to the utmost of human capacities in virtue of God's love. This is not a claim to special treatment from the standpoint of law and politics. And in fact, Am Yisrael is a nation that transcends the usual categories. That's one of the reasons why we had to go to Mitzrayim, which was the most powerful empire at the time, and be sort of broken out of that imperial force. Nor is it a claim to exclusiveness in the sense of exclusion. Am Yisrael does not have an exclusive claim on God. God has an exclusive claim on us. And similarly on every other nation as well. As a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, Am Yisrael's task on this view is not to preach a message, but to pioneer the exemplification of humanity as beloved by God to all humans. And I'll finish with two questions we won't discuss, but I'm happy to talk about them to anybody else. Two ways to understand that universal dimension of Am Yisrael's mission. So one way would be every individual, this is the Rambam's view, I think, every individual from whatever background has the opportunity to join with Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael remains the one exemplary collective on this view. You can join as a Ger Toshav, a sort of resident alien. You'd follow the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, or you could convert like a Ger Tzedek, but there isn't any other collective except for Am Yisrael. The second view, which is really the view of Franz Rosenzweig, is that now things have really happened in history, and through emulating us, new kinds of collective have developed, which also have special relationships to God. The church is the Ummah of Islam, and maybe others as well. These are transnational, trans-political collectives that are formed in a certain understanding of divine love. And we have to, now that also leads to has led to rivalry, unfortunately. We have to figure out some way to optimize that situation, Rosenzweig thinks, rather than to sort of live with its bad consequences. It could be seen as a good thing. So those are the two questions with which I will leave you, and I've tried to respond to the challenge that Kaplan raised for the chosenness of the Jewish people.
Paul, thank you so much. That was outstanding as always, and thank you for being a constant teacher and educator for our community always, and leader in our community. And we're really privileged to have you. And there's so much also to take in on this year. So we're going